That morning, rain drifted over Seattle, thin as mist, turning the city lights into liquid reflections across the pavement. I arrived at the office earlier than usual. Normally, I'd make coffee, open the Orion dashboard, and check if the overnight data flow had run smoothly. But today was different. As soon as I set my bag on the desk, an email popped up in the corner of my screen. No subject line, no greeting, no signature, just one short sentence. Please report to meeting room 3A at 7:45 in the morning, as soon as possible. An email like that always meant trouble. After 12 years at Brightline Analytics, I was all too familiar with the cold language of corporate emergencies. Meeting room 3A sat in the far corner of the 17th floor where serious conversations usually happened. When I walked in, Ryan Hale was already there. The white fluorescent light glinted off his perfectly styled hair. Ryan was the CEO's son, Greg Hale's, and had recently been installed as Director of Innovation, a title that sounded impressive, but no one really knew what it meant, aside from posting about the future of data on LinkedIn. He sat at the head of the table, the seat that used to be mine during technical meetings, spinning a pen between his fingers as if he were waiting for coffee, not about to fire someone. In the corner, a representative from HR sat still, eyes averted, face blank as a page. Clara, Ryan drew out my name with that practiced friendliness of someone pretending to be warm. Thanks for coming in early. I'll keep this short. I stood straight and waited. He flipped through a few pages, speaking in a steady monotone, like a student reciting a script. He said the company was restructuring, that leadership wanted to rejuvenate the team, that they needed new perspectives and new energy. Then he finished with, unfortunately, your position as head of data engineering no longer aligns with this direction. Every word came out clean, detached, surgically emotionless. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just looked at him, then at the HR rep. She avoided my eyes. I understood. I nodded, removed my badge, and placed the company laptop on the table. My fingers brushed against the cool metal surface, and I remembered my first years there, the nights I stayed late rewriting the analytics system, the weekends I took the laptop home to fix bugs. Every line of code, every algorithm, it was my work, my mind. Ryan gave a polite little smile, the kind people use after finishing something unpleasant, but feeling professional about it. HR will contact you to finalize the offboarding paperwork, he said. Thank you for your contributions, Clara. I wish you the best in your future endeavors. I met his eyes and spoke evenly, quietly, so he had to lean forward to hear me. I hope you truly understand what you just triggered. His eyebrows twitched, then he laughed, probably thinking I was bluffing out of desperation. I didn't. Reply. I turned and walked out. The door closed behind me, and the sound of my footsteps echoed softly against the marble floor, steady and calm. On the drive home, I passed through streets blurred by mist, the coffee shops where I'd worked on weekends, the building where I once celebrated birthdays with colleagues, all drifted past in the rearview mirror like old film scenes I no longer starred in. I wasn't sad or angry, just empty and sharply awake. When I got home, I hung up my coat, set my bag on the kitchen counter, and went straight to my study. The small room was crowded with folders, hard drives, and sketches of Orion, the system I had built when Brightline was still operating out of a cramped garage. I opened the steel cabinet, took out a tiny key hidden behind my mother's picture frame, and slid it into the lock. The soft click sounded almost like a breath. Inside lay an old file, its paper slightly yellowed. On the first page, bold type read, Addendum, Clause 9C, Intellectual Property Rights Agreement. I sat down and turned the pages. The words were so familiar I could recite them by heart. It was the agreement between Greg Hale and me 8 years ago, when Brightline was on the brink of collapse. I had rebuilt their data infrastructure, rewritten the algorithms, and saved the company from bankruptcy. I didn't ask for a raise or a bonus, just one clause: as long as the Orion system remained in use, any organizational restructuring required my written consent. Greg had signed it. He'd said, "You saved this company. I'll never forget that." I traced his signature with my fingertip, then my own. The paper had aged, but the ink was still crisp. Outside the window, the rain had stopped. Morning light filtered through the blinds and spilled across the wooden desk. I sat for a moment, poured a glass of water, and opened my personal laptop. The screen lit up, the command line blinking. I typed slowly. Activate clause 9C. A small notification appeared. Access confirmed. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. Ryan thought he'd won. But what he didn't know was that his little power play had just activated the game I'd spent 8 years preparing. I stared at the glowing text on the screen, the blue light reflecting across my face. What I felt wasn't anger, it was a strange, calm quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when you know you're holding a card no one else even realizes exists. I took a sip of water, leaned back, and listened to the soft ticking of the clock in the still room. If you've ever lived through a moment like that, when someone thought they could erase your worth and walk away, you probably understand me now. It's not pain you feel, it's clarity. And I know, maybe you're listening to this somewhere, on your commute, during lunch, or while cleaning the house. Tell me where you're listening from. I'd love to know how your path compares to mine, and if you enjoy stories of quiet revenge, of justice reclaimed not through fists, but through intellect, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because trust me, this story is only getting started. I couldn't sleep that night. The glow from my laptop flickered across the room, the lines of code I once wrote pulsing like an old heartbeat, alive again after all these years. I opened the archive folder and found the contract titled Brightline IP Rights, Clara Morgan. 12 years, and I had never needed to touch it. But I had kept it safe, like a map you only use in an emergency. I remembered 8 years ago, when Brightline was just a small company teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. There were fewer than 20 of us then, and the old data system was falling apart. I stayed for 14 straight nights, eating instant noodles, sleeping on a chair, rebuilding the entire analytics platform from scratch. The system I created, Orion Analytics, not only saved Brightline, but made it valuable enough to be acquired for 5 times its worth. I still remember that morning when CEO Greg Hale came to the office, eyes dark from exhaustion but burning bright. He took my hand and said, "You saved this company, Clara. I'll never forget that. I didn't ask for a raise or a bonus. I asked for something else. A clause that would protect my creative rights in case someone ever tried to take credit for my work." Greg agreed immediately. We sat together in a small meeting room where the noon sunlight cut through the blinds, and I typed the addendum myself. Clause 9C. It was short, only a few lines, but it was the strongest shield I ever built. The clause read, "All decisions regarding restructuring or management adjustments related to the Orion system, or any derivative products thereof, must receive written consent from the lead platform engineer, Clara Morgan, while the system remains operational within the company's data infrastructure." In simple terms, as long as Orion was still running, I held veto power over any termination or reorganization tied to it. And Orion, as of this morning, was still the heart of Brightline. I carefully photographed every page and sent them to my old attorney, Julian, the same man who had helped me draft this clause years ago. The email subject line was brief: Clause 9C, activated. No explanation needed. Julian was the kind of man who understood without words. Then I wrote another email, this one to Marilyn Shaw, a member of the board I'd stayed in touch with. I remembered lunch with her 3 years ago during the San Francisco summit. She had leaned over the table and said, "Clara, if they ever turn their backs on you, call me. I know what it's like to have your work stolen." I typed slowly, every word measured and calm, without a trace of anger. "Marilyn, I was terminated this morning. It appears that Clause 9C in my contract was unintentionally triggered without their knowledge. I thought you'd want to be aware before this becomes public." I hit send. The clock read 7:45 in the evening. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about balance, the quiet certainty that truth and law would do their work. Still, something stirred inside me, a feeling that could only be described as renewal. I stood by the window and looked out at the city still glowing under the night sky. Down below, office lights stayed on, filled with people like me, working late to hold on to what they'd built. I understood them. I had been them. But tonight, something had shifted. I was no longer holding on. I was letting go. And in that release, I felt stronger than ever. I turned back to the desk and powered on the old computer that had carried me through Orion's first days. Its hard drive held everything: the original code, the system designs, the software registrations under my name. I plugged it in and watched the screen flicker to life. Welcome back, Clara. I opened the scanner, uploaded the contract and technical evidence to an encrypted drive. One copy for Julian, one for myself. Everything was organized, precise, almost ritualistic. When I finished, I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. I knew what would come next. They would react. Ryan would scramble to prove himself right. Maybe he'd try to discredit me. Maybe he'd bury the truth. But I also knew that once Clause 9C was activated, it couldn't be undone. It was like a switch, and when flipped, it illuminated exactly what some people least wanted exposed. I shut down the computer, tidied my desk, and smiled faintly. By morning, the game would begin. They just didn't know the board had been set long ago. I woke up early the next morning. The Seattle sky was still damp and cold, dew clinging to the window glass. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the slow drip of coffee into the pot. I didn't rush to open my email, but then my phone buzzed. A message from an old colleague flashed on the screen. Clara, you might want to check this morning's internal briefing. I turned on my laptop. The Brightline live stream filled the screen. Ryan stood center stage in a large conference hall, the words Orion 2.0, a new era of innovation gleaming behind him. He was smiling brightly, hands outstretched like a confident keynote speaker. We've completely upgraded our analytics platform, he announced. A new, more powerful version, rebuilt under my leadership and our new development team. In the corner of the screen, I saw the familiar logo, but instead of Orion Analytics, it now read Orion 2.0 by Ryan Hale. I sat still, hands resting on the keyboard, eyes fixed on the image. Everything made sense now. He hadn't fired me because of restructuring. He'd done it to claim everything. The system I built, the vision I shaped. He kept talking, presenting to investors like it were his masterpiece. The slides, the graphs, the predictive models, all of it came from the work I'd created years ago. The only difference was that my name had vanished. I remembered the first night Orion ran smoothly and how we celebrated like kids. And now, that creation, the one I'd poured my heart into, was being paraded as someone else's triumph, live on screen. When the presentation ended, messages flooded in from former colleagues. Did you see that? He took all the credit. We all know who really built Orion, but no one dares to speak up. Be careful, they're digging into your old accounts. By afternoon, the story spread faster than I expected. An anonymous post appeared on the company intranet claiming I'd leaked confidential data before leaving. The rumor picked up speed in every chat thread, morphing with each retelling. By evening, it hit a small tech news site. Sources say Brightline is investigating the former head of data engineering for a potential data breach. I didn't react. I had expected this. When someone can't erase your legacy, they try to turn you into a villain. But I also knew Ryan was about to tamper with something he didn't understand: the real Orion system. I opened my laptop and logged into the original Orion build, the one I still had back-end access to. The system was running fine, but in the activity logs, I spotted a strange sequence. Someone was attempting to modify the core files, the section that stored the license authentication. The IP trace pointed to Brightline's internal server. The username attached: Ryan Hale. I didn't interfere. I simply archived the entire log, duplicated it several times, and sent one copy to Julian, my attorney, the same man who had helped me write Clause 9C years ago. I added just one line to the email. He's breaching the system. Julian called immediately. Good, he said in his calm, steady tone. Let him continue. Every move he makes now becomes evidence. Don't touch anything. I did as he said. I shut the screen and sat in the dim light, the soft yellow glow from the kitchen stretching across the floor. I thought about Ryan, the perfect hair, the hollow confidence, the way he spoke in buzzwords that meant nothing. He never understood Orion. He never cared to. He only wanted to use it as a launch pad for his own career, and to do that, He had to erase me. The next day, Brightline hosted an all-hands meeting, streamed company-wide. I wasn't on the employee list anymore, but a friend from engineering quietly sent me the access link. On screen, Ryan walked up to the podium. Behind him, the Orion 2.0 logo glowed like a stage light. He talked about the future of data, technological breakthroughs, and the achievements of the new leadership team. The crowd applauded. He smiled, smug, radiant, and I knew that was his peak, the moment right before the fall. That night, as I rewatched the recording, an automated email appeared in my inbox from Orion's internal monitoring system. Unauthorized modification detected in source code. User R. Hale. Beneath it was a timestamp and confirmation that the backup files had been automatically forwarded to 3 destinations: my inbox, Julian's inbox, and the National Software Registry. I stared at the message glowing in the dark and leaned back, exhaling slowly. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. He thought he could erase me, but he didn't realize that the very system he tried to steal was designed to protect its creator. I smiled faintly. The game had just begun, and this time I was the one who wrote the rules. On the third morning after Ryan announced Orion 2.0, the tech world in Seattle was already buzzing. News outlets ran nonstop headlines about Brightline's revolutionary innovation under the young leadership of Ryan Hale. I scrolled through them while eating breakfast. Every article showed the same photo: Ryan on stage with a glowing logo behind him and the slogan, "Redefining the Future of Data." Not a single line mentioned the person who had built Orion. Not one word about Clara Morgan. I wasn't angry, I was amused, because I knew the truth. What he called Orion 2.0 still ran on the same old foundation I had written. You can repaint a machine, but it still bleeds the same oil. And the moment he tried to detach the core, the whole thing would collapse. Julian called me at noon. "I've reviewed the contract, Clara," he said. "Clause 9C is still fully valid. If they've made any major structural change without your written consent, that's a direct violation. My advice: stay silent a little longer. Let them create their own mess." I agreed. Acting too soon would only reveal my hand. I knew Ryan wouldn't stop. He needed to prove to the board that Orion 2.0 was truly his creation, not just a renamed copy. And to do that, he'd have to tamper with what he didn't understand. That's when I needed to wait. That afternoon, I got an email from someone I didn't expect. Marilyn Shaw, the board member who had once promised to stand by me if they ever turned their backs on you. Her message was brief. "Clara, I've been hearing interesting things. It seems the new system is facing serious issues. I'm not asking you to intervene, but if there's something I should know, I'm listening." I read it 3 times. Things were unraveling faster than I'd predicted. That evening, I logged into the original Orion system. A red alert flashed across the dashboard. Data imbalance detected in real-time sync process. Critical error. I opened the logs and found the cause. Ryan had deleted a small section of code from the load management module, the part I called the backbone. He must have thought it was redundant. In reality, it controlled the entire internal validation loop. Without it, every live data stream across Brightline would begin to distort, potentially costing millions in a matter of hours. I documented everything: screenshots, logs, backup copies, and sent them to Julian. Then I just sat there, watching the warning lines blink across the screen. A part of me wanted to jump in and fix it. That's what engineers do. But I stopped. I remembered Julian's words. Sometimes, to win, you have to let the other side fall on their own. The next morning, word spread fast. Ryan had called an emergency meeting. A former colleague texted me. The system crashed for half an hour. All predictive data went haywire. Ryan's losing it. I could picture the scene perfectly. The chaos in the office, Ryan barking orders like a commander who'd lost his map. He'd try to blame someone else, but soon enough, someone in the technical team would trace the error back to its source. That night, Marilyn called. Her tone was low and deliberate. "Clara, I need to know exactly what's happening. Is he using your system?" I paused, then said, "Not just using it, Mrs. Shaw. He renamed it and claimed it as his own." "You have proof?" "I have everything." "Send it to me." I did. Every log file, every licensing record, every segment of original code with my digital signature. C. Morgan, Orion Core V1.0, all neatly compiled and sent within 10 minutes. When I pressed send, I felt something shift. The story had left my hands and begun to move on its own. 3 days later, the board convened an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, of course, but I knew they couldn't meet without mentioning my name. Inside, Ryan tried to deny everything, insisting the new system was merely inspired by the original, that ownership had been fully transferred. But when Marilyn opened the attachment I'd sent, revealing the source code bearing my digital signature, the room fell silent. That evening, Julian texted me. He's panicking. I just heard they've ordered a full internal audit of the entire codebase. I replied with one line, "The board is mine now." That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept deeply, because I knew that by the time morning came, everything would be different, not just for me, but for the company that had once forgotten who built its heart. 3 days later, Seattle turned cold with rain. I sat in my usual cafe, watching the water blur the glass. News about Brightline was everywhere, but the headlines had changed. No more praise for Orion 2.0. Now they read like verdicts. Brightline data system faces critical failure. Clients losing confidence. I opened an article and read slowly. An anonymous employee revealed that Ryan Hale's new update had caused major data discrepancies, reversing financial forecasts, and prompting several key partners to reconsider their contracts. The article didn't say it outright, but everyone knew where the fault began. I didn't laugh. I didn't celebrate. A part of me was still an engineer, and I knew the pain of watching something you built start to collapse, even when it had been stolen from you. But I also knew that sometimes collapse is the only way truth surfaces. That afternoon, Julian called. "The board completed their preliminary audit," he said. "They've confirmed your original code is still the system's foundation. And worse for him, Ryan altered proprietary segments, enough to qualify as an intellectual property violation." I heard the soft rustle of papers on his end. "Marilyn is calling for a special board session. You don't need to go yet. Let them handle their panic first." I hung up, but my mind stayed restless. I knew Ryan. He wouldn't bow easily. Corner men like him always lash out when trapped. That night, a strange email arrived. No name, no greeting. Just one short line. "Stop now, Clara. You don't know who you're up against." No signature, no direct threat. But I knew exactly where it came from. I forwarded it to Julian. "Keep it," he said. "We'll need that later." Meanwhile, Brightline was in chaos. A friend from the engineering team told me Ryan had lost his temper in a meeting, slammed his hand on the table, shouted at everyone because they couldn't fix the Orion 2.0 errors. He ordered the team to delete the old data and rewrite everything from scratch. But when they tried, the system locked itself down, flashing a message: "Access denied. Core integrity violation detected." That was the security layer I'd built 8 years ago, on a late night when I imagined the worst case scenario. Any attempt to alter the core without my authentication key would trigger a lockdown and secretly record the breach. Ryan had just stepped into the trap he never knew existed. The next day, new headlines hit. Brightline suspends core system amid software. Copyright investigation. Details were scarce, but the news alone was enough to send their stock plummeting. I read it, took a deep breath, and closed my eyes. I wasn't happy, but I felt justice, the kind that doesn't come from revenge, but from balance being restored. That afternoon, Marilyn called again. "Clara," she said, "we need you at the board meeting tomorrow. Ryan's still denying everything. He claims you're just trying to shake the company down." I smiled faintly. "If you want me there, I'll come." "Be ready," she said. "They'll have questions." That night, I sat in my small study surrounded by old hard drives and files. I opened an old video, my first Orion demo 8 years ago. In it, I was younger, hair tied back, voice trembling, but eyes bright. Behind me, Greg Hale, Ryan's father, stood applauding. He was the one who believed in me when the company was breaking apart. And now, his son was dismantling the very thing his father had promised to protect. I copied the video to a USB drive, along with the signed Clause 9C and the access logs showing Ryan's unauthorized edits. When everything was ready, I sealed it in an envelope labeled for board review. That night, heavy rain fell, steady and rhythmic against the roof. I sat quietly, feeling both exhausted and strangely at peace. I didn't have to hide anymore. Tomorrow morning, I will walk into the same room where they once fired me. But this time, I wouldn't be the one on trial. This time, I'd be the one carrying the evidence. And for the first time, I felt ready. The next morning, I arrived at the Brightline Tower earlier than scheduled. The air was damp and cold, the windows filmed with mist that caught the pale yellow glow of the lobby lights. I stood there for a moment, watching employees pass me, some lowering their heads, others avoiding eye contact. Maybe they'd heard the news. Maybe they just didn't know which side to stand on. I didn't blame them. I used to be one of them. The elevator carried me up to the 21st floor where the board was meeting behind closed doors. When the conference room doors opened, Ryan was already seated. His face was tense, but he tried to look composed. To his right sat Marilyn, who met my eyes and gave a small nod. Across the table was Julian, my attorney, calmly arranging his papers. I took a deep breath, stepped inside, and sat down across from Ryan. No one spoke for the first few seconds. The only sound was the clock ticking against the sterile walls. Finally, Marilyn broke the silence. Thank you all for being here. Today we're here to address allegations of intellectual property violation and procedural misconduct in the operation of the Orion system. Ms. Clara Morgan, do you have materials to present? I reached into my bag and placed a USB drive on the table. I have 3, I said evenly. The original contract containing Clause 9C, internal access logs from the past week, and an old video of Orion's first demo when it was still in testing. Ryan leaned back, giving a thin, practiced smile. Impressive, Clara. I didn't think you still held on to those relics. But as everyone here knows, the company has evolved far beyond that. You can't use an outdated project to hold Brightline's future hostage. I looked straight at him. I'm not holding the company's future hostage. I'm reminding everyone that the so-called Orion 2.0 you announced is built on the same system, and that you altered licensed code without authorization. At Marilyn's signal, Julian plugged the USB into the display. The files appeared on the screen, lines of code scrolling like light across the wall. Then the text emerged, small but sharp. Copyright C. Morgan, Orion Core, V1.0. Below it, the access record. User R. Hale. Unauthorized modification detected. The room went completely silent. I could hear Ryan swallow. Marilyn folded her hands on the table, voice steady but firm. Mr. Hale, do you have an explanation for these logs? Ryan pressed his lips together. I didn't personally make those edits. My technical team must have acted without my knowledge. Julian spoke up, calm and direct. Then perhaps you can explain why your personal account performed those actions at 2:17 a.m. last Wednesday. If I recall, no team sessions were scheduled at that hour. Ryan turned toward his father, Greg Hale, who had been silent until now, his face lined and heavy. Dad, I was just trying to move the company forward. I didn't think she would. Greg lifted his hand. Enough. His voice was gravelly, but it carried weight. Do you have any idea what you've done? That clause? You're looking at the man who signed it. She saved this company when it was about to die. And now you've turned her work into a prop for your ego? Ryan's eyes darted around the room, searching for an exit that wasn't there. Marilyn turned to me. Ms. Morgan, what are you requesting from the board? I looked around the table, my voice clear and steady. I don't want my old position back. I only want formal recognition of my intellectual property rights over the Orion system, and a new agreement requiring that any company using this platform sign a licensing contract with me. I also ask that this violation be publicly acknowledged within the company. Julian added, under the law, if the board refuses, we will proceed with legal action using the full body of evidence presented. Silence again. Finally, Greg spoke, weary but resolute. I agree to Ms. Morgan's terms. We'll restore her ownership rights, reissue the licensing agreement, and disclose this decision at the upcoming staff meeting. Marilyn nodded. I support that. One by one, other members followed. Only Ryan remained still, staring down at the table. When the meeting adjourned, everyone began to leave, but Ryan didn't move. I stood and approached him. Do you know why I'm not angry? I asked. He said nothing. Because you reminded me of something. Justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs patience. I turned and walked out. The hallway stretched before me, the noon light spilling long and golden across the tiled floor. My footsteps echoed softly, steady and unhurried. Behind me, the conference room door closed, and I knew the story had ended for me. But it was only beginning for Ryan. When the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, Marilyn was waiting. She looked at me and smiled faintly. You know, she said, it's been a long time since I've seen someone handle a storm this intelligently. It's not intelligence, I replied. It's just learning to listen to what you've built. She smiled and shook my hand. People will be talking about today for a long time. I stepped outside. The wind slipped under my collar, cold and sharp. The city was still loud, the rain still falling lightly, but inside, everything had gone still. I didn't need applause. I didn't need apologies. I just needed my name back. And I had it. In the distance, the Brightline Tower stood tall against the gray sky. I looked at it one last time, then turned away. One chapter had closed. Another was waiting. One where I was no longer erased, but the one writing my own story again. I never went back to the company, but news from Brightline still found its way to me, as if I'd never left. A week after the board meeting, headlines flooded the media about the internal scandal at Brightline Analytics. The titles ranged from Creator of the Orion System Wins Intellectual Property Case to CEO's son suspended for fraudulent conduct. I read them with the calm of someone who had already walked through the storm. I gave no interviews, no statements online. I simply read each article quietly, feeling the stillness return around me. Near the end of one piece, a single line stood out. According to an internal source, Clara Morgan declined Brightline's offer to return as Chief Systems Officer. I smiled. That one was true. I didn't need to go back. A few days later, Greg Hale called. His voice was low and weary, aged by 10 years in 1 week. Clara, he said, I owe you an apology. Not just for what my son did, but for allowing it to happen inside the company you once saved. I paused for a few seconds before answering. You don't owe me anything, Greg. You signed the clause that protected me. That's what allowed me to stand my ground. He sighed. Thank you for not bringing the company down with you. I know you could have, if you wanted. I gave a small laugh. I don't need to see anyone fall to feel like I've won. Before hanging up, he added, I'm considering stepping down. Maybe this company needs someone new. Not another Hale, but someone who understands the real value of effort and trust. If you're starting something on your own, I hope you'll let me invest. After the call, I sat by the window, watching clouds drift slowly across the sky. 8 years at Brightline had taught me that intelligence can build an empire, but only trust can sustain it. And now I was ready to begin again, not from the wound, but from the wisdom. I opened my laptop and scrolled through old sketches and prototypes. Orion belonged to the past, but it was only a fragment of what I could create. A new system began to form in my mind, not just an analytics platform, but a safeguard for small businesses to protect their intellectual work. A technology to ensure that people like me would never have to fight alone again. I called it Aegis Data Shield, the Data Shield. Julian stopped by a few days later, carrying a folder. I think you'll want to see this, he said. Some investors are interested in your new project. They've heard how you handled Brightline. I flipped through the pages and saw familiar names, including one small investment fund owned by Greg Hale. I laughed softly. The world's smaller than I thought. Julian shrugged. He knows he chose the wrong successor. Maybe this is how he's trying to make it right. I thought for a moment, then nodded. If he's sincere, I won't turn him away. But this time, I'm doing it my way. No one signs for me again. That night, while I was working, a message appeared on my phone. It was from Marilyn. Congratulations, Clara. The board just released the final decision. Ryan's been dismissed and his access permanently revoked. You won. I looked at the message, then set the phone aside. I didn't feel triumph, just closure. The sense that one long chapter had ended and it was time to turn the page. The next morning, I drove out toward the suburbs. The wind moved through the trees and the sky was clear and open. I stopped at a small cafe by the lake, opened my laptop, and began typing the first lines of my new project. No tension, no fear, just the soft rhythm of the keyboard and the steady beat of my heart. I had lived through it all: betrayal, loss, anger, and found peace on the other side. Behind me, Brightline still stood. But I no longer belonged to it. I belonged to the road ahead, to a place where justice wasn't just reclaimed, but rebuilt, line by line, idea by idea, breath by breath. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. In the weeks that followed, everything moved faster than I expected. My name began appearing in professional journals, not alongside Brightline anymore, but with a new phrase: Clara Morgan, the mind behind Aegis Data Shield. I didn't hire a PR firm or buy a single ad. It all happened naturally. Maybe people were drawn to the story: a woman engineer whose work was stolen, who was erased, and who came back by building something of her own. But I didn't see it as a comeback. I was simply doing what I'd always wanted to do, only now I was free from those who never understood the value of creation. Aegis grew so quickly that I had to hire 2 young engineers. One of them, Jamie, had once worked at Brightline. He knocked on my office door one afternoon, eyes hesitant. I know what happened, he said quietly. I was on the tech team back then. I saw how they erased your name from everything. I stayed silent. And I've hated that ever since. I looked at him, not with anger, but understanding. What matters, I said, is that you chose the right side now. He smiled faintly. Yeah, I want to build something no one can steal again. That sentence stayed with me all night. I realized Aegis wasn't just a technical project, it was a statement, a declaration for people like me, those who'd been overlooked or robbed of their work without the power to fight back. I wanted to create technology that would help them protect their ideas, not through lawsuits, but through systems built for transparency, accountability, and fairness. While my small team worked late nights refining the platform, Brightline continued to unravel. A journalist friend sent me a leaked internal memo. The board was divided. Greg Hale had announced his early retirement. Ryan had filed an appeal, claiming the company was being manipulated by outside interests. I shook my head reading that. Still Ryan, forever the victim of his own choices. But this time, no one was listening anymore. A week later, I received an email from Marilyn. Clara, I thought you should know. Ryan has withdrawn his appeal. He's left Seattle. No one knows where he went. Maybe that's for the best. I stared at the screen for a while. I didn't feel triumph, just quiet relief. The storm had finally passed. I thought about Greg, about the old team, about that cold conference room where everything began. Now it was only a memory, fading like smoke. That night, I stayed late at the office. The desk lamp cast a warm glow over the wall where our first team photo hung. Me, Jamie, and 3 others, all smiling. I looked at it for a moment, then turned back to my laptop. The screen lit up with a message: Aegis Data Shield V1.0. Build successful. I sat still for a few seconds, then opened the project notes and typed one final line before closing the file. Nothing here was built for revenge. Everything was built for protection. The launch was set for early spring. The investors, including Greg, had finalized the funding agreements. I no longer felt anxious or uncertain. Just clarity, calm. I knew I was on the right path. On launch morning, I stood on stage at a small tech conference. Below me, hundreds of people waited. I took the microphone and a deep breath. 8 years ago, I began. I built a system designed to make business data smarter. But I forgot to ask one question. Who protects the people who build it? Aegis was born from that question. This isn't just technology. It's a reminder that every act of creation deserves protection, not by power, but by transparency. When I finished, the audience rose in applause. Under the bright lights, I spotted Julian smiling in the front row, and Marilyn giving a small, proud nod. I walked off the stage lighthearted, each step echoing in the rhythm of the applause. There was no anger left, no trace of the old bitterness, only the quiet certainty that I had turned the worst thing that ever happened to me into something that could protect others. Outside, the Seattle sky was clear for once, sunlight breaking through the clouds. I drew a long breath, feeling the cold air tinged with salt from the bay. Maybe, finally, everything had turned out exactly as it should. That afternoon, after everyone had left the auditorium, I stayed behind. The light of dusk poured through the tall glass windows, casting long shadows across the empty chairs and the big screen still showing the Aegis Data Shield logo. I looked at it for a long time, feeling as if I were looking at a different version of myself, steadier now, no longer trapped in the past. My phone buzzed. An email from an unnamed address. Clara, I watched your speech. Whether you believe it or not, I truly regret it. R. I read the short message over and over. No excuses, no explanations. Just 3 words. I truly regret it. I didn't reply. I turned off the screen and leaned back in my chair. Some apologies don't need to be heard, because time has already spoken for them. And maybe, for Ryan, that message was his first step toward facing himself. A few days later, I saw Greg again. He came to my new office, a renovated little house turned workspace. He looked around, his expression a mix of pride and quiet remorse. You did it, he said. I still remember the first day you presented Orion in that old, cramped room. Back then, I just hoped it would work. But now, you've built something bigger than technology. You've built trust. I smiled softly. All I did was rebuild what I once believed in. I can't change the past, but I can redefine its meaning. He nodded, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. I've signed over my remaining Brightline shares to you. Consider it my last thank you. The company will continue using the Orion system, but now all rights belong to you. I took the envelope, surprised. You didn't have to. Greg gave a weary smile. There are things I can't undo, but at least I can do what's right while I still can. He placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. Keep that faith, Clara. Don't ever let anyone make you forget who you are. After he left, I watched the door close and felt something settle inside me. A chapter had truly ended. No anger, no battles left to fight. Just peace, the kind that comes when you realize justice, if patient enough, always finds its way home. Time passed. Aegis grew faster than I imagined. Small businesses started adopting the system, and tech journals called it the most reliable innovation protection tool of the year. Sometimes I received emails from strangers. Because of Aegis, I kept my products safe. Or, thank you. Now I'm no longer afraid of being erased. Those messages moved me more than any award could. I wasn't living to prove anything anymore. I was living to keep building. And to me, that was the most elegant revenge of all, to rebuild, stronger and more humane. One late autumn night, I sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the lights ripple across Lake Union. The wind carried a hint of salt from the bay, mixed with the smell of coffee from the cafe below. I opened my laptop, planning to jot down notes for the next version of Aegis, but paused instead. I just stared at the blinking cursor and realized I was smiling. I thought about the years behind me, the sleepless nights, the endless meetings, the morning Ryan told me, "You're fired." If that moment hadn't happened, I might never have found myself again. I whispered into the cool air, as if to someone I used to know. Thank you for pushing me out of the place I no longer belonged. Then I typed the final entry in my project log. Orion saved a company. Aegis saves people. Justice isn't about getting back what was taken. It's about building a world where nothing can be taken again. I saved the file, closed the laptop, and looked out at the shimmering city lights. Seattle was peaceful that night, and for the first time in a long while, so was I. One chapter had closed. But the story of Clara Morgan, the woman whose work was stolen, who reclaimed her light with her own hands, was only beginning. I sat a while longer, listening to the wind hum through the open window. Outside, the reflections from the high-rise towers danced across the lake, glimmering like old memories, some painful, some proud, and some simply calm. If you've stayed with me this far, maybe you've been through something similar, when your effort was dismissed, or when someone tried to erase your name from what you built. I want you to know, standing back up doesn't have to be loud, and it doesn't require revenge. If you keep moving forward, smartly, quietly, with purpose, life itself will return your justice in due time. Which moment in this story moved you the most? Was it when I was fired, when the truth came to light, or when I chose to forgive and start again? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them because each of us has our own story about what justice means. And if you love stories where intelligence triumphs over power, where calm becomes the sharpest weapon, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. I have many more stories to tell about people who dared to reclaim their worth in the smartest way possible. Thank you for staying until the end of this journey. And remember, sometimes silence is the loudest sound of justice.